Starting with line 1, I'll read the list of the deceased. Donald Hallett Moore, Francis Marion Eckert Fleming, Leonard Warren Dayton, Joanne Dayton Drabo, Jane Beverly Dayton Finch, Naomi Mabel Cone Cronk Herbaugh, Grant Henry Forsyth, Agnes Laraway Westfall Hammond, Frederick Durwood II, Charles Edward Pazdera, James Arthur Malring, Fred Held Howell, Thomas William Howell, James Hutchin Hurt, Ron Bellows Guy, Delba May Kylie Moore, Henry David Hannett, John Robert Patterson, Renee Hazerjian Buchanan, Winthrop Cannon Giles, Evelyn Yucumson Eckert, Mary Isabel Money Howell, Alan Lee Krager, Joan Wattich Dayton, and Maria Gabriela Bravo Birch. Line 2, Elizabeth Preston Tupper Griffs, Stephen Carter Griffs, Alice Mae Skelly Miller, Fred Albert Skelly Jr., Beatrice Josephine Bale Sheehan, Suzanne Lee Guy DeJong, Catherine Jean Rouse, Eileen Inez Dwyer Walter. Line 3, Leland Windsor Secord, Christopher Mitchell Hubbard, Robert Carroll Zinser, Robert M. Davis, Dr. Samuel Sidney Bradford, Peter Shepard Burr, Nancy Helen Gaines Lizette, Adeline Louise Wade Brando, Stephen Laverne Rudd, Archie Moore Hollebeck, Gary Lester Reynolds, Helen Ho Hubble, Carl Swedenborg Johnson, Jaretta Lee Johnston Zinser, Raymond Leroy Grable, Janet Ellen Phillips Ellis, Judith Ann Ives Johansson, Josephine Diana Wilkinson Gould, Albert Erickson Schuster, Ruth Agnes Julia Baker Wilkes, Dawn Engelhart Rudd, Sita Mahakian Northrop, Ellen Marie Rome Gould, and Vincent Paul Marini. Line 4, Mary Alice Moore Frey, Angelina Theresa Cirami Lakatos, Reverend Robert Leroy Lawler, Edward Alexander Schnack, Thomas Lee England, Marvin Ray Schrader, Howard Decker Swart Jr., Rosilla Morehouse Latin Torbeck, Ann Decker Bickford, Arthur Bertrand Kelly Jr., Richard J. Rutherford, Noel Malcolm Gagno, Milton Frank Northrop, Eleanor Florence Northrop Pritchard, Kailani Elizabeth Delgado, James Henry Northrop, Roger Jason Northrop, Dora Altamore Bowman, Stanley Robert Martin, Sarah Marie Sackett Ertz, Lawrence Dale Sackett, Florence Elizabeth Moore Nichols, Daniel Lee Williams, James Alfred Boyd III, Iva Fern Mallory Slater, Virginia Ruth Moore Fox, James Frederick Moore, Robert William Stumpf, Robert Wainwright Moore, Eva Jeanette Moore Bruton, Anita Ruth Moore, Scott Moore Perry, Irene Orvetta Cole Schnack Spear, Elsie Smith Knapp Schnack, Karen Marie Hosier Northrup, James Arthur Kilmore, William John Oliva, Robert Otten Monroe, Betty Lee Moore Mallory, Jacqueline Ada Yale Moore, Virginia Alice Huntington Moore, Eva Marie Bram Moore, Charles Stewart Perry, Danny Lloyd Kofel, Calvin Stephen Pritchard, Lloyd Nelson Breton, and Mrs. Blanche Cheeseman Moore. Line 5, Bruce Moore Smith, John Smith Leonard Jr., Everett Lewis Leonard, Helen Leonard Spinello, Fred Riffenberg McIntyre, Margaret Lisa Myers, Lucille Catherine Bidwell Quarles, Catherine Marie Walker, Joshua Lawrence Smith, Michael Francis Riley, Mary Elsa Van Aken Wilbur, Eunice Miranda Van Aken Weeks, Arlene Jean Marie Terry Van Coren, Edith Mildred Hawken Morena, Joseph Peyton Tunstall Jr., Lillian Florine Frisbee Johnson, Suzanne Martin Wakeman, Warren Hughes Keeter, Marion Virginia Schloss Pomeroy, Charles Moore Alaben, Betty Moore Alaben Buttrick, Mary Jean Preston Corcora, Judith Preston Held, Reverend Hugh Crichton Edsel, Anne Clark Cleffiker Doan, David Sands Dales, Kenneth Barry Mason Jr., Ruth Delight Fisher Smith, Harry E. Lehman. Line 5 continued, Marion Markley Leonard, Ralph Spinello, Frederick Charles Rayberg, Virginia Grace Bach Oliver, Elvira H. Wagan Van Aken, Marion Helena Bush Van Aken, John William McGrade, Alan Eugene Welton, Albert Cornelius Mooring Jr., Eugene Steinbacher, Mary Gertrude Gridley Alaben, Cornelia Henrietta Velkamp Hawken, Florence Lorraine Hoyt Preston. Line 6, William James Watt, Betty Jean Sullivan Dean, Robert Allen Farron, Adam Robert Farron, Russell Davidson Gray, John Elliott Moore, Jane Elizabeth Mawar Wright, Barbara Jo Danner Watt, Gerald William Tasker, Geraldine Alice Graybill Davis, Edward Monroe Harris Jr., Marilyn Francis Horick Greenman. Line 7, Robert M. Jones Jr., Benjamin Howard, Harriet Elizabeth Hebley Daly, Robert Edward Daly, Robin Moore Hirschberg Porter, Mabel Elizabeth White Bradley, Gary Edward Stanley, Robert Edward Moore, Nancy Jane Swan Johnson, Michael Emery Swan, Deanne O'Brien Deemers, Robert Emmerich Paulson Jr., Donald Russell Van Horn, Dorothy Adelaide Van Horn, Anne Isabel Smith, Arlene Marguerite Brown Baneda, Twyla Marion Munholland Jose, William Lynn Moore, James Aubrey White, Frederick W. Bradley Jr., Richard P. DeWitt, Alfonso Campagna, Larry Casey Munick, Lonnie Robert Maxfield, Verna Elaine Barker Titus, Mary Virginia Davis Marvin Salon, David Gordon Maynard, Richard Dean Jensen, Dale Lester Vernon, Francis J. Winkler, Shirley Agnes Reed Moore, Jeanette A. Sorensen Bemis, Lois Jean Campbell Titus, Mary Margaret Neitzer Wilde, Catherine Rose Schatzel Cranston, and James Randolph Jose. Line 8, Herbert Joseph O'Brien, Brian Moore Gardner, Elizabeth Ransom Gallistel, Edward Alley Downs, John Nelson Billington, Marion Thelma Simpson Lamb, Elliot Martin Simpson, Forrest William Kenny, Eula Ruthalie Wayman Hefner, Clarence Kendall Wayman, Virginia Lucille Warren Ainley, Arthur Leon Arksey, Phyllis Jean Chronic Hostetter, Terry Wilson Secord, Milton Ralph Secord, David Neal MacArthur, Jack Lee Sappenfield, Bertrand G. Desmarais, Leonard Hubert Lauk, Boyd Frank Fields, Dorothy May Hughes Waterbury, Joan Palmer Secord, John William Sealer, Don Harvell Wasson, Dolores M. Muhatka Patrick, Melvin Burnell Grenemeyer, and Alma Lovena Jones Coville.
One more, Juanita.
We have one more.
My apologies, I have an incorrect name. It is Peter William Stump for line 4. Amy?